Recording in progress.
Good morning, Conrad and Ted. I cannot hear you. No.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, now yes.
Yeah,
Great.
I'll try to see whether it's possible for me to share my screen because a couple of days ago it didn't work.
Yes, please.
So I'll try. Is this shared now or?
Yes, I can see your presentation.
And
You want to
now?
try to start the presentation so that we check it?
So, and does it, you see it now or?
Yes, I can see it. If you want to try to present, I can see if everything works.
So I'm trying to present now. I'm scrolling through the document.
I cannot see that.
I have it on presentation mode on my screen.
Yes, I can only see the presentation. Okay, now I see it. That you are going on the first, second, third, fourth.
Or
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Because apparently when I go to presentation mode, it doesn't work. So
Okay.
I will stay in this mode then. Is this fine?
Yeah, sure. It works for me, so.
Yeah. So do I leave it open? So is it still open now or?
Yeah, is it still open?
Okay.
Maybe we can wait 10 minutes before the rest of the attendees join us, and you can share again, or you can also leave it like this if you prefer.
So now you still see it, huh?
No.
Now you see it again.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, because I get like a screen here which says that it's loading. So but yeah.
I can see your presentation well, so I don't see any loading button
Yeah,
at the moment.
it's on my screen. I will stop sharing now.
Okay. Okay. See you again.
Yeah. I'll do it the last time. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, this should work. So you see it again now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. No, because apparently once I start sharing the screen, the video is switched off, and that's what gives some information.
Yeah, I noticed that, but the important thing is that we can see your slides and your voice then in the Q&A. It's better to interact and see also your video.
Yeah. Okay, then that should work. So I don't know why it works now and why it didn't work a couple of days ago, but okay, the most important is that it works now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll just still get a glass of water.
Sure. We have still 15 minutes, so.
I wanted to be well in time because if something doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. Better to try it first year.
Yeah, and the problem is I'm here in my office, but on this front, I have no technical assistance. So
I hope to help you in case you have any issues.
Yeah, but it should work now.
Good morning, Ted.
Hi, Katerina. I'm not hearing you.
You hear me now?
Check my audio.
Can you hear me now? Good morning, Christine. You are muted. Sorry. Christine, you're muted.
Is this better?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay,
You can hear me?
I can, yes. But
Okay.
I can't see. Ah, yeah, I see you up there.
Good to meet you after some emails in these days.
That's right.
Sorry for the spam again.
Yeah, yeah. I think, could I just try out, is this allowed, the share screen
Yes, please.
to make sure, because I'm a Luddite. It's an expression in English, which means people who, it was a movement, people who refused to share, to use technology. But okay, share screen, but entire screen.
Hi, Katerina.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Ted. Welcome.
Yeah, I had to switch to Zoom because I had no audio, but I
Ah,
can hear you now.
that's too bad, but that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Ted, if you could log off from the platform, because now I see you that you have logged in twice, so it appears twice your profile.
Okay, because right now,
Not from Zoom, but from the platform. So the first one you tried.
oh, okay. Let me go back there.
Thank you.
I'm looking to see where to log off. Oh, okay, here we go. Okay, that should work, right?
I still see two, but it should probably work in a few moments.
Yeah, it says I'm logged out on the other one.
Okay.
Is that good? Oh, no, I'm still there.
Let
That's
me see if
strange.
I can remove that. Yeah, I will remove that from here.
Okay.
Okay, that's work. Christine, if you want to try to share your screen, we still have 4 minutes before the welcoming words. I don't know if you're still there. Or Ted, if you have anything that you would like to test before the session starts.
As long as you can hear me, I can see you now and hear you. So I'm just going to go back
You don't
on.
have the presentation, so.
No, I don't.
So you don't need to share the screen.
No. One more
That's
complication
great.
I don't need. Okay, I'm gonna turn my camera off.
Good.
Good morning, everyone. So we
Good
were
morning.
just in the foyer and we need is finishing up, and as soon as everyone's ready here at, well, 10 o'clock for us. I think for Ted, it's immensely early. I see Johan speak, but I don't hear him.
I think you're muted. No, we can't hear you.
Nee, niks. Misschien meneer Hansen, als u op het pijltje naast de microfoon drukt, heeft u dan keuzes tussen microfoon of audio? Sorry, als u op het microfoontje linksonder staat, er staat een pijltje naast. Als u op het pijltje drukt, dan zijn er keuzes. Of soms zijn er keuzes. Misschien dat het verkeerde microfoon is verbonden. Geen keuzes? Zit u nog in het platform of anders kunnen we het ook via Zoom zelf doen? Dat is misschien makkelijker. Catharina. Oh. U hoort mij ook niet. Oh, wel, oké. Oké. Als u anders, zit u in het platform in Zoom, zeg maar? Want anders dan, er is een blauwe knop onderaan. Open in Zoom. Misschien moeten we dat even proberen, dat beter werkt. Dan bent u wel zometeen op 2 plekken ingelogd, dus dan moet u even ook op het platform weer eruit. Maar...
Mag ik al mijn scherm delen, Annika? Can I already share my screen or?
Do you mind if I say a few things before you do, when we start?
No problem, no problem. But it worked a couple of moments ago, so I guess it will still work. But I'm always a bit in doubt. So, and for the rest, we stay in this plenary session. So this means that I always introduce the next speaker, etc., and the Q&A. And are you going to ask people to put questions in the chat? Then I can monitor them as well.
I think that would be best in the chat, and then we'll keep an eye on them as well. And after each speech, if there's a little room, we can do 1 or 2 questions. If not, we'll just do it at the end of the panel.
Okay.
Johan, did it work to open it in Zoom? Okay. So pressing the blue button on the top, bottom left did not open any screen or whatever. Are you in Google Chrome or a different browser? Okay, so I think what we have to do is this, because we have to get started. If Yashin, can you please get in contact, have a call or email contact with Johan to send him the login information to just go through Zoom. So get Alex to send you the link to just join this session so that Johan can get off the platform and use Zoom particularly. Is that okay? And then we're just gonna get started, so. So I guess we are already live. I'm sorry for everyone who was coming in. We had a bit of a technical issue, as you know, that is often the case. But I'm glad to see everyone coming in here. This is the very, very first session of the Societal Impact of Social Sciences, Humanities and Arts Conference. We're very happy to see you here. Everyone here is here with a certain purpose, but I can tell you why we decided to get people together on the topic of societal impact for social sciences, humanities, and arts. This is simply because we do believe there is a lot of value and a lot of impact to be had, but it is often just not seen, and it is often in different pathways. Much of the work that we do trying to create more value with science and society, it stems from, well, the STEM disciplines and the health disciplines, and we want to focus more now for the 5th time this year. We're trying to focus more with these gatherings on how can we actually make this better happen? How can we demonstrate the impact of social sciences, humanities, and arts, because it is there, it is just often less visible. And how can we make sure that the incredible value that these disciplines can have on society actually also reach society and have that impact through their own pathways. This is why we got together in this international conference. We're very sorry, again, unfortunately, like last year, that we have to meet online. We did our best to create the best platform that we could for you, but unfortunately, we will not be meeting in person. And this is especially unfortunate because we would have been in beautiful Brussels, in the Belgian science ecosystem, which, if you ask me, is an incredible example of a lot of things that can happen, so many initiatives, so many things that happen on the basis of research excellence and the value that it has on society. But fortunately, Belgium and the science ecosystem it has is not necessarily a place, it's the people, and a platform like this brings together the people, and not just from Belgium, but from all over the world. A particular person that I think you should know about and you will know about is one of the most exemplary, amazing people who have worked in the who has worked in the science ecosystem in Belgium, but also for his institution, mostly at the University of Leuven, regionally, nationally, internationally, has had a lot of influence because of his expertise and a lot of amazing initiatives that he created to increase research excellence and the impact it has, economic, social, you name it. And he's been doing this for many, many years. Fortunately, 6 years ago, he also agreed to be the chair of AESIS, of the AESIS advisory board. And now he has been so kind to not only be one of our main partners in this endeavor, help us create the program, but also chair these upcoming 3 days. I would like to introduce to you Koenraad de Bakkere. Koenraad, I'm so happy to have you here. We're very excited to get this conference started, and everybody's been listening to me in the foyer, so I'm going to give the word to you now because everyone's heard enough from me and you have so much more to say about this topic. I hope everyone enjoys this first session and we'll see each other very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Annika. A number of practical questions. I already shared my screen. Is it visible that it is shared now? Because I only see my screen. So that's
It is
that's okay.
visible, Konrad. It is visible, but it's still in editing mode.
Yeah, okay, but then I can, I will not put it in presenter mode because when I put it in presenter mode for one reason or another, when I move the slides, it doesn't appear on the screen. So I'll stick to this mode, but I guess everyone can see. So thank you, Annika, for the introduction. I think you were right mentioning that social sciences, humanities, and arts, they are omnipresent, but they are sometimes invisible or visible to a limited extent. And I must say, a couple of years ago, almost 10 years ago, together with the predecessor of Vario in Flanders, so VRWI, we did a study on valorization of research in sciences, social sciences, humanities, and arts. And this was a central theme that we already touched upon at that point in time. So with hindsight, it's important that we have this conference. And this conference really came on the screen, and it literally and into being because of the work we do at ECOM. And here I also refer to our colleagues of ECOM Brussels, Walter Isebaert and his team, who are doing a lot of work on what might be impact-like measurement and indicator frameworks for social sciences, humanities, but definitely also arts and scientific disciplines that are a bit outside the scope of the traditional indicator method. So that's why it's important today to have, today, tomorrow, and the day after, to have a plethora of speakers that will touch upon the various topics and the various issues and challenges that we face in different disciplines of social sciences and humanities and arts when we talk impact. So what I would like to do the next 10 minutes is just a brief introduction with some concepts and some concerns and some considerations that will be high on today's and tomorrow's agenda. First of all, it is about impact, understanding impact, and we all know, and yesterday we still had the quarterly steering committee of ECOM, of our research center, joint research center, which is a shared research center by the Flemish government and the 5 Flemish universities. And we were discussing also the progress we make in research on impact. And one firm finding at the moment is that impact is a multifaceted concept. It's also from time to time a fuzzy concept. And a lot depends on the perspective you want to take in order to fill out impact and impact measures and impact narratives. So this means when we talk impact during this conference, we have to understand that it's a multi-perspective view that we will have to take. And of course, when talking impact, it's always important because we are living an era of mission-oriented research. And of course, important challenges society is facing, challenges like climate change, challenges like energy transition, challenges like poverty, challenges like resource depletion, etc. They all call for solutions. They call for science to come to the rescue and to the support of those solutions. And that's all very well. And that's also the reason why impact is so high on the agenda when we talk missions and transitions. But I still want to start this brief introduction by referring to an old monograph that was written in 1939 by Abram Flexner. Abram Flexner was the founder of the Institute for Advanced Studies at the University of Princeton, one of the most renowned fundamental science think tanks in the world. And he wrote a monograph on the usefulness of useless knowledge. And this means that if we want to generate impact, we also have to accept that knowledge will not always be immediately useful. And I think the vaccine development and the COVID crisis have illustrated, and of course this is not social sciences, but have illustrated how important is fundamental sciences to come to solutions in a short time delay when we need them. And that's why in present societies, and that's where social sciences and humanities provide real contributions, many problems, many challenges can be addressed by emotions, by haphazard insights and solutions that may be less meaningful. And that's why in 1996, the New York Academy of Sciences, 1996, so 25 years ago, already published a book with the title Flight from Science and Reason. So I think many of the problems we face as a society have to be supported and solved thanks to science and reason, and we shouldn't get away and move away from science and reason, and that's what the New York Academy of Sciences already foresaw in 1996. To show how important impact can be when we talk energy transition, when we talk climate change, well, those are just two highly influential studies. One that appeared in and was published in 2013 by William Nordhaus, Nobel Prize winning economist, titled The Climate Casino, and a book that was published a year ago by Leah Stokes, Short Circuiting Policy, that from a social science perspective, from an organizational science perspective, describes in great detail what the different pitfalls are in the United States if you want to develop an energy transition. She has studied different states. She has studied the influence of certain actors and the enactment of certain policies. And she shows very clearly how social sciences, through their analysis, through their approaches, can contribute to policy. So this means that what we are addressing today in terms of impact of those sciences, well, this impact in policy arenas can be very real and is definitely something we can consider and discuss in the days to come. And those are just two examples. There are many more, and those are interesting examples for us because they're not related to the hard sciences, if I can call them hard sciences, as if we would be the soft sciences, which is definitely not the case, because social sciences and humanities can also lead to hard policy facts and insights. And another example, it's not just about social sciences and humanities, but it's also about interdisciplinarity. It's about social sciences and humanities joining forces with the other sciences. So Charles P. Snow, the two cultures of science, which he published in 1959, this is the past, this is long gone by. We have to join forces. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, a relevant, but also a challenging study. This study was published a couple of years ago, actually in 2016, 2017, by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. And you see the title, what would happen if we have a sparse pandemic in the period 2025-2028? So a futuristic scenario for public health risk communicators. This means that what we have experienced the last 2 years or the last 1.5 years, well, social scientists joining forces with medical profession, they were foreseeing such potential afflictions. And this means that, once again, the role of science in policy, definitely when we engage in foresight type of exercises that may have a serious impact, well, this is where social sciences and humanities can play an important role as well. And that's, once again, science and policy, and where we may become more visible and more impactful than we think and than we sometimes are. So these are just 3 examples where social sciences could be and can be of high relevance. And I do hope that we have more cases to come in the days to come, and that we can discuss why does it happen, and why does it happen that these results and insights are insufficiently picked up by the policy scene, by other actors in society, etc. Because I think we do contribute and we have something to say. I was already mentioning the mission-oriented research that is popping up today, given the huge transitions and challenges humanity is confronting. But of course, mission-oriented also puts us with the question and confronts us with the need for answers as to what's in such a concept. What do we mean with missions? The war on cancer is a very holistic approach. For instance, putting a man on the moon was a very concrete approach. So the question is, what's in a name? How do we address it? And what impacts do we expect? And who selects, given the multi-perspective approach to impact, who selects what type of impact we will be striving for? Because impact can be very diverse in terms of who benefits, in terms of what avenues are pursued. Think of energy policy. Think of, for instance, the speech by the French president yesterday, President Macron, on energy impact and mission-oriented activities towards energy transition. So depending on perspective, impact will have a very different or may have a very different consequence. And of course, it's always, and that's why we are scientists, it's always about evidence, and it's always about measurement, judgment, listening to opinions, but in the end, trying to come up with a good governance of that evidence. And I keep referring to the work of Justin Parkhurst at the London School of Economics, who tells us, well, we should move from evidence-based policy to good governance of evidence in an impact era where impact is multifaceted. The good governance of evidence and impact will be important to move on and to set and put the next steps in our joint research agendas. And of course, there is always the debate, but I'd rather see it as two halves of the same coin. Hendrik Lorentz, the Dutch physicist, Nobel Prize winner, said in Dutch, door meten tot weten. It's only when we start measuring that we start knowing. And of course, that's something that we have been pursuing as scientists all the time. And in an era of big data, of data analytics, of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the like, measuring and through measurement, getting better insights is what we are all doing day in, day out. But at the same time, social psychologist Donald Campbell already over 30 years ago warned us that the more any quantitative social indicator is used for social decision making, the more subject it will be to corruption pressures and the more apt it will be to distort and corrupt the social processes it is intended to monitor. I do think that when we read and when you look into monographs and reports on artificial intelligence, the ethics of artificial intelligence, the European Commission regulations that are into place or coming into place with artificial intelligence, that, for instance, the danger of conclusions, the danger of insights based on biased data is something that figures high on the agenda. So we have to understand that measuring is important, but measuring has downsides, has side effects, that we also have to measure and monitor, continuously. So those may seem to be two opposites. As far as I'm concerned, there are also two dimensions of what Parkhurst called the good governance of evidence. We need evidence, we need measurement, we need data, but at the same time, we have to understand biases. We have to understand when they will lead to what Campbell called corruption pressures, and when they will lead to misuse. So every data point, every indicator can be used and misused. And this is something that we should also take into account when discussing impact under its various approaches, as I just referred to. And of course, it's obvious, also the social sciences contribute. Because when Vannevar Bush published his report to President Eisenhower, Science, the Endless Frontier, it's obvious that this is not just about technology, because a recent article in The Economist, hypothetical article, said, well, what would happen if the Nobel Prize medicine would go to an AI in 2036 instead of going to a human being? Well, that's something that should keep us busy as social scientists, because that's also the way we have to consider what potential impact can be, may be, and may come into being. And finally, we have to understand those are the future studies. This is an old medieval manuscript where it's the starting point of the statement that, amongst others, Newton made. If I was able to look that far, it was because I could stand on the shoulders of giants. This dates from this Chartres manuscript of the 13th century. And we have to understand that social scientists, even when we are omnipresent, we should be more visible, and we should become more visible in terms of thinking of impact, because we are all standing on shoulders of giants, which is our scientific community. And of course, I want to conclude this introduction with a statement by the French writer and poet Paul Valéry, who said, well, le problème de notre temps, c'est que le futur n'est plus ce qu'il a été. And I do think that with many impact studies that social scientists and humanities researchers and arts researchers are doing and engaging with, when we think about the future, well, definitely the future will not be what it used to be. And so, having said this, I think I will stop sharing my screen and we can continue with the rest of our plenary session this morning. And it is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker. And the first speaker is Johan Hanses. Johan is the Secretary General of AEWI. AEWI is the Flemish, I would call it ministry, to keep it simple, of science, innovation, and economics. And it's a quite unusual combination that in Flanders, science, innovation, economics are under the umbrella of one major ministry. Johan is heading that ministry. So I'm very happy to give him the floor and he will clarify how they watch and think about the impact of social sciences, humanities, and arts in our Flemish community, but also beyond. Johan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Koen. Can everybody see the slides and hear my voice?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So thank you, Koen, for giving me the virtual floor. As a Secretary General of the Department of Economy, Science and Innovation in Flanders, one of the 3 regions in Belgium, I would have liked to welcome you all in person in Brussels, the capital of Europe, of Belgium, and of Flanders. But helaas, that's not possible. But if you look at the program, you will see that the organizers of this conference carefully selected the names of the virtual conference rooms. You see the names of the chocolate room, the waffle room, the sprouts room. So whenever possible, come to Belgium to taste also this. And in the meanwhile, let your imagination do the work. But do not only come to Belgium to taste our waffles or chocolate or drink our beers, but also be inspired by our science. Because Belgium is one of the innovation leaders in Europe. In the latest ranking of the European Commission, the so-called European Innovation Scoreboard, Belgium is ranked 4th in Europe, after the 3 Scandinavian countries. Belgium also has one of the highest R&D intensities in the world. In 2019, our R&D intensity in Belgium was 3.17% of our GDP. And the Flanders region is even doing better with an R&D intensity of 3.35% of our regional GDP. So let me come to the theme of this conference. How can science transform and impact society for the better of all actors involved? It's important to reflect on a strong impact framework for assessing and stimulating impact. So I hope to share with you some reflections. First of all, why impact is important, why impact matters. As you can see on the slide, governments spend a lot of money on R&D. We all know it's not enough, but it's a lot of money. In the European Union, it's more than 100 billion euros. In the United States, it's 144 billion euros. And in percentage of GDP, you can see it on the screen. So who says public money also says accountability? What are the benefits for society? What impact science creates? And it's not an easy question to answer. Certainly not in our time, in a world which is called a VUCA world, a world which is volatile, which is uncertain, which is complex, and with a lot of ambiguity. And to understand this world and to improve this world, science is of the utmost importance. But proving the statement, we face some challenges. Because the path from inputs to impact is a very complex path. There is no one-to-one relationship between the resources and activities, what we call the inputs in the science systems, and the impacts they create. Not all the ingredients are in our sphere of control. We only control the input side and the activities, and to some extent also the outputs. But we do not control entirely the outcomes and the impacts. We can influence them, but not control them, because there is no linear path from input to impact. We live in an open, non-linear world and in networked systems. So, nevertheless, how to maximize impact? Especially in addressing the grand societal challenges like climate, energy, mobility, and food, they are all systemic challenges. And in addressing those systemic challenges, science is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. In tackling the wicked problems, we need inter, multi, and transdisciplinary approach. And also, we need, as scientists, as scientific community, reach out to other actors in society. And in tackling the grand societal challenges, we need transformative innovation and system thinking. And in order to increase the impact of science, it is important to have a focus on productive interactions, because knowledge creation and knowledge diffusion should be seen as a co-creation process between 4 actors in society: research, policymakers, industry, and civil society. And when you look at it from this angle, impact is or will be the outcome of a creative encounter of these 4 actors and the contribution to a common goal. And in that encounter, we should give room to unpredictability, to experimentation, to a sufficient time span, and also to failure. So to determine research impact in this context, a new approach to evaluation is also necessary. On top of bibliometrics and peer review, we need a wider form of evaluation that takes societal impact into account. To increase impact, we should invest in connecting the 4 actors in the ecosystem in what is called the quadruple helix. And we should not only connect those 4 actors in our region or in our own country, but also internationally. And that's what we start to do with this conference. And I think that's the way to go, and wish you all a good conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. We have some time in case there would be a couple of immediate questions for Johan at this very moment. We will, of course, have ample time at 11:30 during the Q&A. But can I ask everyone, if you have a question, just type it in the chat box and then we can deal with it. If anyone has something to ask at this very moment, please signal it, and then we can ask Johan to give his view on it. But I don't see questions at the moment, so then I suggest we continue, and when questions pop up, Johan, we get back to you. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the clear overview, but also pointing us to the context, and definitely really important, the systemic nature of that context when we talk impact and when we talk social sciences and their role in society. So I'm sure this will pop up again and come back again in the days that will follow. So the next speaker is Christine Davidse. She's professor in linguistics, has done a lot of work in the area that is relevant to this conference, also linked to the Fund of Scientific Research Flanders, FWO. So Christine, I'm happy to give the floor to you for your introduction and intervention. Please.
Thank you very much, Professor De Bakkere. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you and we see your screen.
Okay, I have to get a slide show going. Yeah, that should be it. So in this presentation, I just wanted to share reflections with you with regard to 2 basic questions. Firstly, how can research in the social sciences and the humanities impact and transform society for the betterment of all the actors involved, and how can policy making advance this impact? So I will start with the first question, and I want to consider 2, in my view, fundamental issues with you here. Firstly, I will argue that research, and all research from the social sciences and the humanities, can help all the stakeholders to reflect on fundamentals, whereby fundamentals seem to me, well, ultimately what values inform frames of reference, such as the REF or the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and what goals are formulated, informed by values, where, for instance, to just immediately give an example, if we talk about impact on the economy, is the ultimate aim the growth of the gross domestic product, or is it well-being of all citizens? Some would argue those 2 are different goals. In the second place, I would like to think with you about the perception, which I feel is there sometimes, and which I think we have to repudiate, a perception that certainly some areas of the social sciences and the humanities can do very little to impact on society. For instance, an example that is often cited to me is musicology. What can musicology contribute in terms of impact? And I would like to suggest that all areas of the social sciences and humanities can and must impact on society, particularly through interdisciplinarity. So to give an idea about the first question, what values, what goals do we pursue? And what goals are formulated in all those famous frames of reference? Well, I've just, by way of example, taken a few actions that are formulated under the heading Impact on the Economy. And in the REF, we see that this is new products, businesses, services, business growth and jobs. According to the EU, generation of innovation-based growth and creating more and better jobs. So we have a very similar actions and goals here. In the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which may not be visible to you, I'm not sure. Well, I can't see it myself for some reason because of the gallery, but well, the point is that, can you see?
We see your slides, but we don't see if there is a picture with the SDGs, we don't see it, but it's on your slide. So that's
fine, thanks. That's reassuring, thank you. So we see that the Sustainable Development Goals formulated by the UN do not just talk about economic growth as such, but they add qualifications. They talk about sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And when they talk about employment, they talk about full and productive employment for all and decent work for all. And of course, even though the values are not explicitly formulated, you see that there's reference to values here to do with equity. And another important point is a reference to ecological, environmental concerns by the very use, of course, of sustainable, which is part of the framework as such. Another point I would like to draw attention to is that growth is often taken as a sort of absolute, and many of the words used always are about more jobs, more businesses, new this. So in a sense, I suppose philosophers might say more man-made remaking of reality. By contrast, the Sustainable Development Goals perhaps allow some room for the thought that bettering society may not always be just about growth, but may also sometimes be about, well, limits of growth, recycling, reusing, well, restoring. So on this question of what sort of growth, you see two quotes here. The first quote says, economic growth accompanied by worsening social outcomes is not success, it is failure. The second quote says, while sustainability is far from languishing on the corporate periphery, more effort is needed and fast. Where do these quotes come from? Well, the first is a quote from a speech by New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and the second one is a quote from The Economist. Now, I like these two quotes because they illustrate to me a very important point. The point that we can debate about values, we can come together on values, we can come together on shared action goals, which are not politicized, which go deeper than political positions and so on. And this is very nicely illustrated here because obviously Jacinda Ardern is, well, her program is informed by her Labour Party affiliation, so more left-wing. The Economist is well known to be a conservative, liberal, a very good, in my view, journal. And you see that the debate is possible here. If one depoliticizes ideas of left and right wing and so on. Interestingly, also note that the cover of The Economist, which I included here, in fact, has an action and a very central action, which is about cleaning up, so restoring, which I also drew attention to when I talked about the action goals in the previous slide. the importance of restorative action. Now, can the social sciences and the humanities bring science to citizens, bring scientific debate to citizens? That's important in impact. And can the SSHA bring them together on shared action? Well, I think they can. And by way of example, I would like to say a bit about a thinkers program on the language of debate and communication about climate change in Flanders, which is currently being organized at the Royal Flemish Academy. I am one of the organizers together with Anne-Marie van den Bergen from Ghent. Now, what we found in this thinkers program is that, yes, all SSHA research can contribute. Philosophy and religious sciences, yes, of course, because they are on about the meaning of life, economy of happiness, ethics, equity. Linguistics, that's my own discipline, yes. We think too often that there is a straight link between a term we always use and a concept, but we forget that terms have connotations. To give an example, you can talk about the climate crisis, and you can talk about the climate problem. You can talk about realistic action, and you can talk about ambitious action. And as such, those terms have connotations, which you can find in the dictionary, but on top of that, they have ideological and political connotations. If someone talks about eco-realism, I think in Flanders, we will be able to predict with a fair degree of likelihood where they are on the political spectrum. And if people talk about ambitious action, we can do the same. The unfortunate thing is that by even using the terms ambitious versus realistic, we already view the others as perhaps opponents on the political, in the political debate. And as I said, we have to depoliticize this, and hence we also have to be very careful with the terms we use. And I give more examples here of things that can be contributed by all sorts of domains of science within the SSHA. Also art, also music, which can engage citizens in the issue, exhibitions, and so on. So yes, all SSHA research can do a lot to better society, particularly via interdisciplinarity within their own group, but also with the other groups. We noticed this with the Thinkers program on climate change. The most enthusiastic participants there come from the sciences. They are really interested in how language functions as a medium, which is so important, for instance, to science communication. And again, the United Nations also recognizes this. The Sustainable Development Goals are integrated. We must balance social, economical, and environmental sustainability, the creativity, know-how, technology, financial resources from all of society is necessary. Now, how can policymaking advance the impact of the SSHA on society? Here, I would like to consider two questions. Firstly, I think we have to do a lot of thinking, and we have to debate with all the stakeholders about societal impact as a factor in the agenda setting of research. And we have to do the same about societal impact as a factor in the evaluation of research funding. We have to be clearer. We have to make this much more of an important aspect in policy making. We have to decide to what extent social impact, societal impact, can motivate research lines, the extent to which we want them to motivate research lines. And this has an effect on how calls are formulated, who are involved in formulating those calls of funding bodies. This has to do with research planning by all research institutions. So the importance we give to societal impact also correlates, I think, to a large extent with specific types of research, where interdisciplinary research is very important. And interdisciplinary research, often despite lots of efforts, remains a fraught area. We see this, for instance, in the panels of the FWO. We see how the University of Leuven certainly tries to do a lot, but it is a difficult area. And ultimately, for instance, in the research funding of the Research Council, on which the Research Council of University of Leuven decides, we find that it's only a small part of the funding. So societal impact also have to do with the validating of modes and audiences of research, open access, science communication. It may affect formats of project grants, perhaps adding duration to projects that really address issues that are fundamental to society. And well, to just give, well, here actually I wanted to first give the positive view on the interaction between funding, university research, fundamental research, and also societal impact. This is an idealistic view. I found it formulated by Peter Doherty, Nobel Prize winner, who was awarded a honorary doctorate in 2009 at the University of Ghent. And in his speech, he said what is unique to university research as opposed to industrial research is that it is independent and multidisciplinary. And he said then, which is what is needed to address today's major problems. And he focused on climate change. He himself, of course, deals with infection and immunity. He has his research institute in Melbourne, and he gives the values of discover, deliver, inspire, connect, in which pure research and accountability, delivering are integrated in harmony. And this is the ideal. But I still think we have to recognize that there may be a tension between academic freedom and accountability towards bettering society. Why do I think this? Well, academic freedom, of course, is all to do with individuals or groups pursuing their own research agenda. And on the positive view, and certainly the positive side, this means that they do what they are best at. They deliver excellent research, which as such will better society. On the other hand, the question is whether accountability towards bettering society should not determine, at least partly, the research agenda of research groups. And then this, I think, may mean, and we have to recognize this, higher starting up costs, slower academic yields, more participants are involved. Interdisciplinary research, I think, always has higher starting up costs. And therefore, I think institutional support, institutional policy making is necessary, and also rewarding of societal impact in the evaluation of applications, of careers, of institutes, etc. Research is funded by taxpayers, by individual donors, and by industry and businesses. Motivations for evaluating research impact, and here this is research impact as a whole, the more purely academic research excellence and societal impact. Well, motivations are advocacy, analysis, accountability, very important, particularly towards taxpayers, and allocation of means. And the evaluation of the research impact has been very strongly developed, as we know, with bibliometrics and all of that. But the evaluation of societal impact has been developed much less strongly. Therefore, I think it's necessary that there is reflection and dialogue with all stakeholders precisely on this issue of the place and the importance and the clarity of societal impact in the evaluation of research. For instance, I think it's important to determine a percentage of the societal impact in evaluations. If it is just a vague box to be ticked, I personally don't think that's good enough. Also, the importance of societal impact has to be differentiated according to what is being evaluated. For instance, it is different when we are looking at applications for research funding ex ante from when we evaluate the results of granted funding ex post. It is different when we look at societal impact as a factor to evaluate careers, and that evaluation is the basis of promotions. It's also different when we evaluate the importance of societal impact in research groups. And here, the question of entrepreneurial funding of universities comes into the picture. I know this is a delicate issue, but it's one that highlights the importance of criteria determining allocation of funding, including, for instance, extra structural funding of certain research groups. So I can conclude here. I've just discussed a number of questions, which, you know, from my own experience as a researcher and as someone who has been a member and a chair of many committees, which have come to mind. Their questions, and I'm sure you have also felt, well, certainly my commitment to the importance of considering these questions. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Christine. Any questions at this very moment? Because I see an empty chat box. Maybe that's my screen, or maybe that's really empty. So please feel free to enter questions, because we will also collect them for the Q&A at 11:30. But given the emptiness of the chat box at the moment, I suggest we continue with our next speaker on our agenda, and this is Rajesh Tandon, and he is the founder of Participatory Research India. He's also closely involved with UNESCO, and has definitely, from his perspective on participatory research, interesting insights to share with us. So please, Rajesh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Conrad. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. I don't know whether you have a presentation you want to share.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my presentation in a minute, and if I fail, then Bonita may help. Let me see. I've got the share screen in front of me, and I'm gonna put my presentation. Maybe Bonita may be able to help in this.
Katarina, can you share?
Oh, very good, very good. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting conversation about the societal impact of social sciences, arts, and humanities. And I've been listening to the previous speakers with great interest. As Conrad introduced me to you, I am involved in participatory research for the last 45 years. Priya, as a participatory research in Asia Institute of Research and Training, has been working for the last 40 years. We are celebrating 40 years of journey. And I am also UNESCO co-chair, along with my co-chair, Dr. Bud Hall, who is in University of Victoria, Canada, UNESCO co-chair on community-based research and social responsibility in higher education. So thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting dialogue, and let me share with you some of my reflections. Let me see if I can move the slide. That's great. I am going to tell you a story of a very recent participatory research that our team has been involved in, and then draw from that story certain principles about how to view societal impact of research. During this COVID-19 period, both in 2020 and in 2021, domestic workers in India, and I'm based in Delhi, so I'm talking about 100-kilometer radius from Delhi. Domestic workers faced a special distress. Domestic workers are maids and various service providers, which provide services to the families, drivers, caregivers, cleaners, dishwashers, cooks, wide range of them. And mostly they are women. So these women domestic workers faced special distress in thousands of households in Greater Delhi area. They faced loss of income due to sudden lockdown. They could not go to work. Their employers, when the lockdown began in third week of March, many of them didn't get salary for the month of March. Many didn't get, of course, any livelihood for the next few months. And the same was repeated in 2021. And then there was an impact on their dignity, and they were told that don't come inside the house because you may be carrying the virus. Later on, to everybody's surprise, we discovered that the virus attacked middle and upper middle class more than the poor. And then, of course, they faced loss of security and increased violence at home. So we have been working, next slide please, we have been working with a group of migrant workers for many last 4 or 5 years, and basically looking at their livelihood and their safety issues. So as the lockdown began and we began to hear from a few of them, our team decided to launch a quick research. Now, in a traditional research, how would we have gone about it? We would have designed and conducted the research ourselves. We would have reported findings to some journals and to professional peers, and those findings would have been communicated to policymakers, who then would have designed some relief programs for domestic workers, who then would, through a slow trickle-down impact, receive some benefits, perhaps a few years after the pandemic is over. But in participatory research, we went around it in quite a different way. Next slide, please. So, we were already in contact with domestic workers before the pandemic began. So we got to them through phone, through WhatsApp, and asked them what the problem they were facing. They began to tell us all their difficulties, and they said what they know of other domestic workers. So we said, okay, let's frame a research and collect as much data as we can. The data collection was done together. Our team and some of the domestic workers themselves and their young daughters and sons who were more educated and could use a small mobile collected data. And then we together analyzed the data. We brought to that micro-analysis of several hundred households, and you can see the report. I provided the link to it. We were able to bring the macro information that was emerging not only from the larger province of the region, but also nationally, that similar stories were emerging from other parts of the country and indeed from the world. So they designed a process of campaigning with the findings, and you can see one of the ways they campaigned is to draw pictures on a sari, a traditional Indian dress for women, and they took this and placed it in front of the households and in the communities where they were working. Next slide, please. So how did this research cycle get completed? The data collection was undertaken jointly, analysis were undertaken together. They brought micro reality, we added macro analysis, and they started then to identify households which needed relief and needed health services. Together, we published these findings in the media. We wrote an English language report, which you can also read, and they produced findings in postcards, as you can see, and they sent these postcards to their local elected representatives, to local officials, to local health service providers, and to the media. The campaign that they did immediately caught the attention of policymakers, and soon they began to respond. And by responding, it included providing both relief and access to immediate health services, and earlier this year, also access to vaccination. In the context of this experience, our team of researchers began to frame a larger study, a more nationwide study of the impact of the pandemic on the lives and livelihoods of women domestic workers. And that study is currently ongoing, again in partnership with domestic workers in other parts of the country. Next slide, please. So this is an alternative way of doing research, where the starting point of research is by building trusting relationships with the communities where we want to support improvements in their lives, including achievement of any of those SDGs. A foundational principle of participatory research methodology is that knowledge is produced and used by everybody, including those in academia. Knowledge production is not the monopoly of the academics, and in fact, even before academia came into being, communities and societies have produced knowledge, used knowledge, and communicated knowledge. Of course, not through writing high-priced journal or book articles, but through oral and cultural methods. So the starting point is to recognize and value local experiential knowledge, and therefore build research process through acknowledgement of that knowledge in jointly framing research questions which are of importance to them. You can add your own research question on top, but don't exclude research questions which are important. And involve them in data collection analysis. We could not have done 2 rounds of this research if they were not involved in data collection. There was restriction in mobility, there were limitations of the digital technology, and there was, of course, distress. So when they got involved, they were able to act as peer researchers, peer supporters, and that helped in authentic data collection. And together we produce evidence, they mobilize themselves and policymakers in their own way. We published the report in the media and in journals and shared policy briefs in English language, because many of our policymakers don't understand the language of domestic workers. But in the process, we also supported awareness raising for domestic workers. We supported what legal rights they have, what rights they don't have, what is the minimum wage that they should get, what is the meaning of security of employment and social security benefits. And they use that knowledge, that awareness, to also mobilize themselves and get organized. And as you notice, we used multiple methods of dissemination, including art forms like a sari with pictures of their distress, which they showed not only to media, but they displayed in front of the policymakers' houses because offices were shut down. Next slide, please. So these are some of the details of linkages that further reports you want to read, further corrections you want to make. I want to make just 3 more points, and you can remove the slide, please. From this example and this methodology, it is important for us to understand that when we talk about societal impact, can you remove this slide, please? Okay. So I want to highlight 3 points from this example. First, when we talk about societal impact, let us understand that society is not a homogeneous entity. And the phraseology we use of stakeholder involvement is not it's a technical phraseology. Within the stakeholder groups, there are enormous power and income inequalities. Within society, there are poorer, less served, more vulnerable groups, households and communities, regions and ethnic groups. And therefore, societal impact can also mean helping industry do mining. But societal impact can also mean supporting the vulnerable to access meaningful social security and livelihoods. So it is important to distinguish between stakeholders and distinguish between whose needs and interests the research is going to serve. Because otherwise, we end up perpetuating the status quo. The second principle to acknowledge in this is that all forms of social science research actually are derived from various aspects of people's lives. We may call them psychology, sociology, education, social psychology, etc., etc., but they relate to people's everyday lives. While disciplines may be compartmentalized, lives are not. And therefore, we may chip in one side of a person's life, a family's life, a community's life, without understanding its relationship to another side. So we could look at mental health problem of domestic workers today without understanding the loss of livelihood and the indignity that they faced during the pandemic. So what is called a multidisciplinary approach or interdisciplinary approach or transdisciplinary approach, they are phraseologies. But if we start from the lives of people, we will become integrated disciplines anyway. And people's lives will suggest to us the research questions that can have an impact on them. The third point I want to make is that in today's context, research and research incentives are more or less distanced from or unconnected with questions of impact. Most of the time, impact is an afterthought. Most of the time, measurement of the impact through varieties of templates is something that is looked at in what kinds of innovations have been produced. But knowledge solutions with mobilize action from communities and policymakers to solve pressing challenges of our times, that approach to impact is very different and can only happen when our view of knowledge production incorporates a bottom-up as well as a top-down perspective together. Let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts and insights, Rajesh. And I think also the cases that you brought forward are definitely inspiring. And it would be interesting to see amongst our audience what other cases in our other constituencies can be brought to the forefront and can be part of our discussion on impact. But I guess going forward, we may see more of that. As I still see no questions in the chat for the time being, everyone is collecting them, I think, for the Q&A. So please keep thinking. I would like to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Professor Ted Hewitt, who is the president of the Social Science and Humanities Research Council in Canada. So I guess that for you, it's very early morning. So thank you for sharing and taking the time to be with us at this difficult hour of the day in Canada. So please, the floor is yours. And if you want to share a presentation, go ahead.
I have no presentation, but I'm certainly happy to be here this morning. Thank you, Conrad. And yes, the work never ceases. Doesn't really matter what time of day. So bonjour, collègues. I'm really delighted to join you all. I was really intrigued by Professor Tandon's presentation, some of this work with Professor Hall at Victoria Shirk Funds. In fact, he's been the recipient of some very large partnership grants to pursue some of this work. So we're really pleased to support that. The subject of this conference, the impacts of the social sciences and humanities and the arts, is more critical than ever. And I think this was mentioned early on as we work collectively to address the evolving societal impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and chart a path to recovery. Aujourd'hui, je vous donnerai principalement en anglais un bref aperçu du travail que fait le Conseil de recherche en sciences humaines pour augmenter la contribution de la recherche en sciences humaines à l'élaboration des politiques aussi bien nationales qu'internationales. So I'm very pleased to present today in English, as I've said, but certainly I'm happy to take questions in English or in French, as Canada's two official languages. Let me talk first about our contribution, Shirk's contribution to the United Nations Research Roadmap for COVID-19 recovery, because I think this is a great example of how we work to create impact in the social sciences, humanities, and the arts. Our organization, Shirk, we call for short SSHRC, was a key collaborator on the development of the UN roadmap with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And this was designed, this initiative, as some of you may know or been involved with, was designed to help stimulate global thinking about the research required to assist the world's nations in implementing effective post-pandemic recovery strategies. The roadmap firmly positions science and research as the world's best chance for recovering better, which is the expression that's used. And specifically, the roadmap states that recovering better from COVID-19 will depend on bold efforts to strengthen health systems, shore up social protections, protect economic opportunities, bolster multinational collaboration, and enhance social cohesion. So in light of the scale of action needed, the socioeconomic recovery from COVID-19 also provides an historic opportunity to reimagine societies using a human rights lens and initiate the transformative changes needed to achieve the better and brighter future envisioned by the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which one of my colleagues already referenced. Within this context, it's clear that social sciences and humanities research is integral to developing the evidence-based policies and the policy frameworks needed to drive and shape the recovery and reimagining of societies. And that's precisely why SSHRC was at the UN table and why SSHRC and social science, humanities, and arts research needed to be placed front and center. And on that, I think we all agree. But that's by no means all that we're doing to promote research in SSHA and enhancing its impact, not only through our core mandate of supporting and promoting excellence in research and training, but by directly informing the creation of policies and policy frameworks. So how do we go about this? Principally by continually evolving to become a more agile, flexible research funding organization for Canada and for the world, and by fostering a dynamic national research ecosystem, one that's marked by collective commitment to research excellence and a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and that features strong partnerships and strong networks. After all, addressing complex global issues like pandemic response, climate change, and systemic racism and inequality requires bringing together diverse viewpoints, findings from a range of disciplines, and input from different jurisdictions and all sectors of society. So what are our own internal strategies to strengthen policy frameworks? First, we've developed and implemented a range of internal policies and policy frameworks to strengthen the research enterprise and the impact of research and training that we fund, from ethics and equity, diversity and inclusion policies to policies that promote and support open science and stewardship of research data. These include our research data archiving policy, the tri-agency open access policy on publications and research, and the research data management policy. And these cross not only our agency, but the other funding agencies in Canada as well. Our recently released Indigenous Research Strategy is also an important framework to inform research policies and practice while supporting Canada's government-wide commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous people. This strategy identifies new ways of doing research by and with our Indigenous communities and of strengthening Indigenous research capacity, much in the same way as Professor Tandon was discussing in the case of India. Second, we've established a flexible, adaptable funding program architecture. Our core funding programs remain open, so we continue to fund the ongoing research of individuals in single disciplines, but by becoming more agile in our programming, we can also respond quickly to emerging government priorities such as COVID-19. For instance, we've launched 2 rapid response funding streams for research on issues related to Canada's pandemic management and response. Our flexible approach also allows us to directly work with government departments as they're in the process of developing policy on issues like refugee integration, environmental assessment, defense and security, public transit and mobility, and fighting online discrimination. For example, in partnership with the Canada Mortgage and Housing Organization, we ran a $13 million competition to fund research to help inform development of the National Housing Strategy. We also work closely with the Canadian Federal Anti-Racism Secretariat to host a series of roundtable discussions with SSH-funded researchers and senior public servants to mobilize knowledge, research knowledge, and build greater understanding of the impacts of systemic racism on racialized communities, religious minorities, and Indigenous people. I also want to highlight the work that SSH has done through our annual International Policy Ideas Challenge, which is undertaken in partnership with Global Affairs Canada. And this is a multidisciplinary initiative that trains students to identify innovative solutions to emerging international policy challenges. And these are shared directly with officials within this department. Applicants test their skills in translating academic expertise into policy language and insights and strengthen the potential impact of their work in real time. In addition, we recognize that addressing multidimensional societal changes requires research that cuts across a number of disciplines. And that's why our funding of interdisciplinary research has grown steadily over the years. As an example, administered by SSH, Canada's New Frontiers in Research Fund supports interdisciplinary research that is higher risk or addresses a major challenge with the potential to realize real and lasting change that extend beyond what normal funding agencies support. SSH has also increased the grants available for partnered research. Our partnership research grants provide timely support for both small-scale and large-scale stakeholder-driven partnerships. They allow researchers, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and non-academic partners to work together to address urgent and specific needs, challenges, or opportunities. And I'd like to point out as well that these grants are open to co-investigators from outside Canada as well, who can be funded through the program. And this tends to be unique, or has been unique, within the array of funding programs offered internationally. One example of something we funded is the Partnership Engage Grant COVID-19 Special Initiative, which supports research and fosters knowledge exchange on COVID-19 related issues. And with the new 2020 Canadian federal budget allocation to SSH, we recently launched the Race, Gender, and Diversity Initiative. And this new program supports partnership research to inform actions to address social disparities related to race, gender, and other forms of diversity, a significantly important policy priority in Canada. And again, to emphasize that these programs are launched in partnership with community organizations to do work that's directly relevant and applicable to their particular needs and their particular foci. Thirdly, we've embedded a robust foresight function into SSH. This helps us build research capacity and to mobilize knowledge on emerging national and global issues that may inform future and emerging policy priorities. Through the Imagine Canada's Future program, we've identified 16 future challenges that will have a major impact on Canada and the world over the next decade. So far, we've launched funding programs, knowledge synthesis grants, and innovative initiatives and events in areas ranging from the circular economy to living within the Earth's carrying capacity, to working in the digital economy, to the emerging asocial society. All things that were mentioned this morning during the presentations. And finally, we're placing much greater emphasis on strengthening and expanding our international collaborations and funding programs. Over the last few years, we've demonstrated our leadership in this area. As one example, SSH co-leads the Transatlantic Platform, which some of you may have heard of, an unprecedented collaboration between humanities and social science research funders from South America, from North America, and from Europe. The platform offers joint calls for research in areas of strong potential for international collaboration, such as digging into data, social collaboration, and recovery, renewal, and resilience in a post-pandemic world. The platform also aligns policies and practices to facilitate international collaboration, enable interdisciplinary collaboration, and heighten awareness of the role social sciences, humanities, and the arts play in addressing 21st century challenges. Together with Canada's two other major federal funding research agencies, SSH collaborated with counterparts in the United Kingdom to launch the Canada-UK Artificial Intelligence Initiative. And this partnership aims to build competitive and resilient communities, economies, and to maximize the social and health benefits of AI through multidisciplinary research, new international partnerships, and enhanced infrastructure and training in both countries. But we know we need to do much more in the international arena, and that's why we've intensified our efforts and are engaging in some exciting new initiatives. We've partnered with the Agence Nationale de la Recherche in France, the German Research Foundation, and UK's Economic and Social Research Council to form the Open Research Area, or ORA. ORA has recently issued a new funding call for integrated projects where researchers come from at least 3 of the 4 member countries. So these are just some of the ways that SSH is strengthening the contribution of social sciences and humanities research to addressing societal issues, mobilizing knowledge, and building policy frameworks. But allow me just for a minute to come back to the UN Recovery Roadmap for a moment. The roadmap calls for strong action and innovative partnerships across the entire global research ecosystem. Researchers, research funding agencies, governments, civil society organizations, and international organizations, of course, like the UN itself. We must all work together to ensure sufficient support for the research priorities that can potentially inform the development of robust policies. Through global networks, through partnerships, research initiatives, and sharing of knowledge, collectively, we can strengthen the influence of social science, humanities research, and the arts on policy and policy frameworks around the globe. I'm proud to say that SSH is taking up the UN mantle along with many of our fellow funders around the world. I hope all of you here today will join us in helping to achieve a more equitable, resilient, and sustainable future in the post-pandemic period. So thank you for your attention. Merci, collègues. Before I go, just to pitch, I'd like to encourage all of you to attend the Building Alliances on Impact of Social Sciences and Humanities and the Arts on Society panel discussion on Thursday, featuring SSH Council member, Dr. Merlinda Smith. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Ted, for this intervention and also a number of interesting insights. I guess we can discuss further in the Q&A. And this means that I would now like to introduce our last speaker in the plenary session, who's Geoff Mulgan, and he's a professor of public policy and social innovation at University College London. So Geoff, please, the floor is yours. We see you on the screen, and if you want to share a presentation, please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope you still have some absorptive capacity left after so many interesting presentations. What I will say briefly, very much, I hope, is in a similar space to what Ted and Rajiv and the other speakers have talked about, and really my interest in how what might be some new methods of getting knowledge of the past, the present, and of the future as well used and having impact in society. So I'm going to just spend 2 or 3 minutes each on 3 projects which are live and attempts at a different way of addressing this question. The first, these are really about these three questions: how to better align science with the world's priorities, how to mobilize knowledge to support decisions, particularly in a crisis like our current one, and then how to reorient social science in all its forms to help us prepare for the challenges of the future. So the first of this I want to share is a project called Strings, which is about steering research and innovation for the global goals. And this is backed by the UN and others. And essentially has been trying to look with data at how global R&D, science and technology is organized, where it's done, for what purposes, and comes out in the next few months. It shows huge imbalances, misalignments in terms of where R&D is done, perhaps not surprisingly, tiny amounts still done in the lowest income countries, huge imbalances within fields like food, energy, still healthcare, a huge imbalance between spending on hardware and social sciences and social innovation, which is paid lip service but very weakly organized in pretty much the whole of the world. And what we're trying to provide, not only some tools, so at a country level, you can see where R&D goes and how or aligned or misaligned with the SDGs it is, but also to make recommendations on global governance. How in the future could we organize better governance of the world's science and knowledge, which was completely missing when the UN was created in the 1940s. And still the institutions around knowledge, data, evidence at a global level are far weaker than the institutions around money, for example. Anyway, so there's a whole bundle of issues there. And I think one of the great issues for our decade, partly prompted by COVID, is how we do much better at essentially aligning global brain power and the topics the world has decided matter most in the SDGs. The second example I wanted to mention is the International Public Policy Observatory, set up in the UK at the beginning of this year to help decision makers at every level of government, national, regional, local, to basically make decisions. We're mainly focused on social side of COVID, mental health, education, etc. We link into a network in over 100 countries through INCSA, and Blavatnik School, tracking in real time what is being done on things like vaccine passports now, and trying to pull together the best available evidence. So there on the screen, you see something we brought out a few weeks ago on the impact of school closures on children. What did we learn globally? In a week or two's time, we bring out a big systematic review on online learning. Again, what really happened? What are the detailed, subtle lessons from this extraordinary global experiment in shifting primary and secondary and tertiary education onto online? And I think a key aspect of this is many of us have been involved in evidence-based policy for years. I used to run the strategy team in the British government and policy in the Prime Minister's office. In the past, we very much focused, I think, on repositories of evidence. We then moved to set up about a dozen What Works centres in the UK. But I think the whole drive of design is towards making these much more demand-driven rather than supply-push, really involving the decision makers early on. What do they need to know? What are the things they're grappling with? And actually moving to a much more conversational method of getting knowledge across rather than just fantastic reports and websites. And this much more iterative, dynamic model, I think, is one with lots of relevance to other fields, in particular net zero. And we're trying to develop both in the UK and at the European and global level, really much more 21st century models of orchestrating, synthesizing, sharing both the formal evidence and scientific knowledge, but also tacit knowledge, peer knowledge, and so on. Now, these come together in what I think is really interesting work that's been done by the United Nations in the last 2 or 3 years, with its nearly 100 accelerator labs in, I think, over 100 countries now, which have been using collective intelligence methods. And there was a report I was told a few months ago which documents many of these examples. And essentially, rather like what we're trying to do with IPPO, it flips the question on its head. Instead of asking how can research feed into action in a kind of linear way, which was the traditional model, is asking for improving action on something like access to water or gender equity, what are all the kinds of sources of data, maybe from satellites, some of which will be citizen insight, or the size these, and then apply them in methods which are rapid, lean, experimental, but also data-driven. Now, I believe this is actually the future of all government, but it is a world away from the often rather traditional bureaucracies of government. Europe, and it's slightly a world where I did research, wrote a report, and then sort of sent it to the civil servant to act on it. So I'd encourage you at least to engage with this field, even if you're not convinced by it. And it also provides a way of thinking about how in the future artificial intelligence can best be part of this story. And a lot of this report goes through many examples of combining AI and collective intelligence around things like refugee programs, or environmental monitoring, or indeed the future. The final thing I wanted to share, I've been part of a spectrum from evidence, data, and action now on COVID to look at imagination. And last year, out of Finland, we published a paper on the imaginary crisis, the problem that across so much of the world people can picture ecological disasters, a world of robots, but they find it very hard now to picture how our welfare system or our democracy or our cities could be much better in a generation or two's time. And there are many reasons for this, which we go into, but one reason is that actually the academy, universities have largely vacated their traditional role in helping the world to think ahead, to offer designs, options for the future. So we've been pursuing this, about 40 organizations, looking at many fields, including the arts, and I've just actually finished a book on the arts role in social imagination, which comes out from Cambridge University Press early next year, but also at the role of universities. And last week, the New Institute in Hamburg published this quite long paper, which I would commend to any of you who are interested in this space, where I made the case for what I called exploratory social sciences. And my argument was that we're in a rather strange position where the people with deep knowledge of fields like economics or international relations or psychology find it very unwise to make proposals for the medium to long-term future. It's almost career threatening to do that. They have to focus on analysis of the present or the past. And then there are people working on the long-term future and imagination, but they usually don't have much depth of knowledge or very good theory. And so we have this gap, which means that if you try and search, in the journals for options, good designs, let's say of how a parliament might be run in 2050, or how net zero economy would really work in practice, there's remarkably little there. And so this argues for what exploratory social sciences would look like, what good would look like, how you'd assess quality, how to combine evidence and depth of knowledge, but also use of methods from the arts, from creativity, and from design. And just two sort of final examples of this. I tried to scan economics and talk to lots of people in economics as for any examples of the economics profession using creative methods from the arts or design or indeed any other field or from business, and could find almost nothing. A complete lack of curiosity in how to be creative. And how to generate more radical, more serious long-term options. I point out in the paper that the internet is in a way a warning to us. The internet has been with us for of 30 years now, World Wide Web, but academic, when it did start happening, was mainly critical, as a result of which there was, even by 2015, 2018, there were almost no options published by the Academy for how to regulate the internet, how to deal with fake news, assaults on democracy, the mental health effects on children. And this extraordinary gap is one of the reasons why it took us so long to put right many pathologies of the internet. Something slightly similar is happening with AI now, a wonderful outburst of critical work and ethical work, but remarkably little serious work on design of options, so that when the European Union or the Chinese government is designing new AI regulations, they're essentially having to sort of make them up as they go along, inadequately served by the Academy. Anyway, this is maybe a provocative argument, but it's put out there at least to promote a bit of a self-critical debate about how universities perhaps recapture their role as centers of long-term, serious social, economic, and ecological imagination. So, in a nutshell, what I'm, as you see, these projects are slightly different but overlapping. The first is really about better aligning the vast spending on science and R&D with the world's priorities, and for that we need new data arrangements and governance. How do we better mobilize knowledge to support the decisions governments are making all over the world all the time now on everything from schools and mental health to vaccine passports, and make this shift to more demand-led rather than supply-push models? And then how do we grow exploratory social science teams in universities so that is attractive to the best researchers, and in so doing, hopefully, fuel our collective imagination at a time when I believe we actually need to be more imaginative about how we prepare for a century of net zero, a century of aging, a century where we will have to learn to live with hugely powerful and sometimes hugely dangerous artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other technologies. So I hope I haven't overrun my time, and I know you've had a lot downloaded, as it were, in the last hour and a half, but I hope some of that makes a bit of sense.
Okay, Geoff, thank you very much for those interesting thoughts. I must admit that there were some bandwidth problems from time to time. So your presentation, we were luckily able to listen to you all the time, but the presentation was not always moving as it should. But that's technicality that I guess is difficult to solve. So thanks a lot. And this brings us to the Q&A session. So far, I have collected a number of questions from a number of people that I would like to start submitting to our panelists. And I suggest that the panelists raise their hand so that I can give the floor to each of you raising your hand. And then when we are exhausted in terms of hands risen, we will continue with the next question. The first question that I have, and this was also inspired by a TED talk, is on foresight. When we want to increase the impact of social sciences and humanities and arts, does it mean that we should engage in a more structural way with foresight exercises? Because I do think that some countries use them, other countries use them haphazardly, and other countries do not use them. So, colleagues, what is your view on the role and function of foresight studies, and how should we tackle it? Is someone?
I'm happy to speak about this if no one else will. So, yeah. I mean, I've been involved in foresight both from within governments and from outside. At one point in the UK government, I actually ran a network of futures teams in every department, and they all did both scenarios exercises and foresight exercises. I think foresight is useful with all the caveats we now know about failures of of prediction. But the two keys which I feel I've learned, one is that the only value of foresight comes if it is talked about, if it is embedded within an organization. If it just sits as a report, that's almost useless. So the key is you've got to get the ministers, the officials, society to really kick the foresight materials.
You're disappearing, Jeff.
I could add something while we're waiting for Jeff. I'm sorry, it doesn't show my hand as being raised, I guess, just because I'm on the Zoom platform. But one of the things I wanted to say about the way we've managed foresight at Shirk is that initially, oh, I think maybe Jeff's coming back here.
Than pure traditional foresight.
Okay.
Maybe
I should go ahead.
If you can continue.
Yeah, so initially, you know, we undertook this as a bit of an intellectual exercise, you know, to get our researchers and our students, you know, thinking about things that were coming down the road. But almost exclusively now, you know, we're managing this within the context of the benefits of what we can provide to government departments and international organizations. So we engage in foresight exercises to inform refugee policy, for example, to inform Canada's international relations, to inform housing policy, to inform energy policy and sustainable development. And these things are done very directly and in collaboration with government departments. So we've taken a very pragmatic turn to this, and this has worked out very, very well for us. And I think we're working with over a dozen government departments now who come to us routinely to undertake these exercises, become part of what we do. So, you know, we have a very, very specialized way of coming at this.
Yeah. So I think it's good that you made the link to the different departments, because I've seen examples where foresight studies are like quite holistic, but without much departmental involvement. While on the other hand, departmental involvement may be extremely important in judging what is worthwhile to look forward to. And so a warm plea here to reconsider the methodologies of foresight and the embeddedness of foresight, because I think we cannot really do without it in the years to come, given the challenges. Another question that I would like to ask to the panelists looking at my chat box here, what do you expect from open science in respect of increasing impact of social sciences and humanities? What is your view on the effects it may or may not have? Someone?
I would like to say something on this, Conrad. I can't show my hand somehow. Rajesh Tandon.
Yes, Rajesh,
Can I
go ahead.
comment on this?
Yeah, go ahead.
As you are aware, UNESCO is going to, in its next general conference meeting next month, table for approval an agreement by all the member countries, recommendations on open science. The draft recommendation on open science is actually quite progressive. Last year, it began by conversation on open science, meaning open access to data among scientists. But then when questions were raised about how about open access to data about practitioners, you take the case of the pandemic in the last 18 months, frontline workers also need information, also need data coming out of studies, and how do they access it if it remains in journals and books, in libraries to which they have no access. And then further to that discussion was the discussion about science is not just that which is produced in the lab. We are talking about excluded epistemologies, indigenous epistemologies, and therefore we are talking about openness of science to all forms of epistemologies. And these epistemologies actually have become increasingly relevant in our planetary fight to deal with the impact of the climate. The primary healthcare model of treatment and curative work in the ICUs that we were forced to be sent to due to the pandemic is not the model that requires attention. What requires attention is how people can prevent and develop their own immunity by using all forms of knowledge systems. And in many parts of the world during the pandemic, organic food, locally grown food, and household practices of healthcare passed down through grandmothers became very popular. So this is a testimony to the recognition of open science in a broader perspective. And I'm looking forward to UNESCO General Conference approving the same next month.
Thank you, Rajesh. Other remarks?
Yes, maybe if I may add, I think the topic of open science is crucial when we want to increase the impact of science, because science has a specific property. It does not diminish when you share it. At the contrary, it multiplies when you share it. So I think that in impact creation, the more open it can be, the better it will be. There's one caveat in creating impact from science. Intellectual property rights stay important. When we want to stimulate public-private partnerships, in linking business to academia, their intellectual property rights still stay important. So I think the general frame is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. It's a good advice.
Thank you, Johan. And I think as closed as necessary or as restricted as necessary, those are indeed concepts that also figure high on the agenda. Definitely also when we look at it from a European perspective, given the concept of strategic autonomy that is today high on the European agenda, but I guess in other parts of the world, it's high on the agendas as well. So we have to strike the balance between that openness and the local needs that are being identified. Thank you for those inputs. Maybe turning to a next question. And I think I was happy to listen to Geoff's remarks on economists and creativity. I just put a small statement or a small remark in the chat box myself, where it took over a century for economists to discover the need for behavioral economics, which is all around now. But this brings me to another question that I see here. How do you see methodological cross-fertilization between social sciences and humanities? Because we talk a lot on interdisciplinarity, but interdisciplinarity also means understanding each other's methodologies. And are social sciences and humanities not lagging a little bit behind what is happening in other fields of science when it comes to sharing and co-creating methodological approaches? So that's just a question that I see here. So who feels?
I can maybe say something about that. So I think it's a great question, by the way, and one of the things that we did with the other councils in Canada, with some funding from the federal government, was to create a program we call New Frontiers in Research. Yes, borrowing on other frontiers type programs, but one of the things we did with that in designing it was specifically to promote new ways of thinking, new methodologies, the formulation of new research questions, and specifically demanded this, in guidelines and in calls for proposals that we put out through the program. So you really had to find ways to kind of get out of the sandbox, as it were, or to think about doing things differently. And that's produced some really interesting results and some interesting collaborations. Not all of them, but some that are quite novel. So I think it can be done. These are things that are funded through the program that would not normally be funded through regular granting agency avenues. But the intention is to do things, that would be quite different, and still quite new. We were only a couple of years out, but we're finding in the analysis of the kind of work that's being done and the methodologies that are being applied that there are some that are definitely trending towards truly new frontiers, as it were, as opposed to older methodologies.
Thank you, Ted. Yes, Christine. You should unmute. Please, Christine, unmute. Yeah. Thank you.
Apologies. Yes. Well, just one thought. Yes, I think it's absolutely essential that we share methodologies and learn about methodologies. For instance, it's very interesting. Psychology, for instance, is reputed to have solved so many methodological issues. I work within a paradigm that has a very bad tradition of continuing wars between schools. And actually linguistics is also the locus of the problem that I wanted to talk about. I think it's very important to for people working in the social sciences and humanities to know a lot, to know about statistics and to look for creative ways of using statistics and so on. But statistics and quantitative methods shouldn't become a holy cow. We also have to develop and talk about conceptual methodologies. For instance, people studying, for instance, one of my former doctoral students is studying Australian languages now, Aboriginal languages. You really have to break into languages that haven't been described, that are perhaps still spoken by one native speaker at this stage. Statistics is not so important there, or certainly you also have ways of arguing about language, drawing descriptions and analysis of language out of the data with qualitative methods. Same the ethnographic methods, for instance. I think they're very important, and ethnographic methods can also be extended beyond anthropology and beyond linguistics and so on. So a healthy balance between the conceptual and the qualitative and the imaginary and quantitative methods is very important here, I think.
Thank you, Christine. I think that's very valuable advice, because when designing programs that aim at increasing impact, then, and in line with what that said, we have to take understanding each other's language into account as well, because as a linguist, you are definitely aware of the importance of language and communication, and there probably our social sciences and humanities also still have some opportunity to evolve in a positive direction. Mm-hmm. Maybe given the time, a last question that I would like to ask to the panel. We see, and maybe that's a bit outside the frame of this session at the moment, but recently I was reading a report by OECD on what they call deliberative democracy. Meaning that in Belgium we have the endeavors of what we call the G1000, so involving citizens in deliberating, dialoguing on certain transition and other impactful policies that later on politicians might enact. So if you look into that issue of deliberative democracy, wouldn't this be an important area for social sciences and humanities to play a role? Because this would mean a very direct involvement in very important societal debates, where the methodologies, the insights, theoretical and empirical, gained by SSH could be highly relevant. So I don't know what panelists think of this type of impact that may be around the corner. if we want to.
Could I come in on this? And actually, I wanted to link it to the previous question. Your mayor in Leuven has created a really interesting governance arrangement. I've spent a little bit of time with him, and all over the world, there's a lot of experiment with citizens' assemblies, co-governance, climate contracts, online democracy tools, which there was very little or much less 10 years ago. So we are seeing live experiments in how democracy
the connection is fading again, Jeff.
It can be revived and reinvented, not in its. But this raises. Can you hear me? I was going to say this raises both a theoretical and a practical question. All of these experiments, like Leuven and Taiwan and Iceland, which is how do you synthesize multiple inputs? And this is a theoretical question for the academy. How does one synthesize economics, epidemiology, psychology in a pandemic? What are the theories of good synthesis? It's a problem for any democratic process. How and who, again, links together the thousands of different inputs from citizens into something integrative. And I've been doing some work on this and been a bit disappointed how little good theory there is.
Yeah,
democracy, but how you then integrate this would be hugely important. And it's a very live issue because all over the world there are science advice mechanisms, social science advice mechanisms through COVID, but they're feeding into systems which often are very weak in terms of capacity to absorb and synthesize all these inputs.
Yeah, thank you, Geoff. Other colleagues who want to elaborate on this? Rajesh, from your experience? But you should unmute so that we can.
Thanks. You know, citizen engagement needs facilitation and evidence together. Most of the time, evidence gathering exercise is de-linked from the task of citizen engagement. Our experience is at a subnational level on recently, before the pandemic, working on the issue of sanitation. And we were able to engage 500,000 citizens of one city in deliberating on options and solutions for sanitation in a city where a third of the population did not have toilets. So the conversation was facilitated by providing information. It was facilitated not just online, because a lot of informal settlements had to be consulted offline. And then, as was mentioned by Jeff, there had to be a process by which these diverse opinions and points of view and suggestions would be synthesized. But we used the national policy framework within which to synthesize what choices and what mechanisms the city level government would operate. And then we helped them to implement those choices. But it was such a successful experience because the ownership of the solutions was with the citizens. They disagreed, but in the process of disagreeing, middle class citizens came face to face with informal slum dwellers because sanitation is a common challenge. So it was a very interesting experience, but it requires a lot of effort in linking evidence gathering and facilitation, keeping the diversity of population in mind.
Yeah, thank you for that insightful case and example, Rajesh. I'm watching the clock, but I'm also looking at the colleagues that Kristin and Johan, whether you still want to add something to the insights that Geoff and Rajesh just provided.
I think they were very strong insights. We can let these insights sink in, as is the case with so many interesting observations and stories. and synthesis we heard. Thanks. Many thanks to all of you.
Okay, thank you. And I see no further comments. Ted?
No, I'm good. I want to thank you for the invitation again and for putting together such an interesting panel with such esteemed colleagues.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Johan, as well. So for contributing and sharing so much thought and insight. This plenary session comes to an end now. Between 12 and 12:30, you can interact on a one-on-one basis or in small groups in the Atomium room. And there is more to learn about the partners in the exhibition. And so we see one another again, or at 12:30 when we start with the parallel sessions. And there is an interview with FWO that starts within a couple of minutes, and you can visit the foyer to watch the interview. So once again, a heartfelt a warm thank to all the presenters this morning, to all the participants. Have a nice lunch break, and we'll see one another within half an hour. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.